Hi, everybody. John DePalma here, and I would like to welcome you to the first in a series of interviews that we're going to be doing entitled The History of Ballroom Dancing Face to Face. So for our first episode, I'm here with my very, very good friend and one of the architects of the ballroom dance industry as we know it today, Mr. Dennis Rogers. Dennis, welcome to the interview.
Thanks, John.
So happy that you're here and that you're able to do this.
Well, I'm happy to do it.
So Dennis, let's start from the beginning. Tell me, how did it all begin?
Well, actually, the first events that were being held here were Harvest Moon Ball, and that was done at Madison Square Garden, sponsored by the New York Daily News, and it was run for many years. They ran 4 dances, foxtrot, rumba, tango, and waltz, and it was a faster waltz, not quite a Viennese waltz, but those dances. Then they had a separate polka division and a separate jitterbug jive.
Wow.
And those were the first competitions. Along about the late 50s, Helen Wicks Reed, who was the editor of Ballroom Dance magazine, contacted Alex Moore in England to tell him about coming over here and starting the international style of ballroom dancing.
Uh-huh.
And Alex started coming over, and the Imperial Society was formed in the late 50s, part of it on the West Coast and part of it on the East Coast. And the first actual professional competition was run by Alex DeSandro at what he called the Atlantic Ball, and it was only a final, and they were solo competitions. We had a soft shoe routine with 1 gentleman and 2 ladies. We had myself dancing with my first wife, and we did a quick step. And the winner of that event was Francois Zoni, who was probably the most fabulous theatrical dancer that I ever saw in my life. So then Alex ran a regular competition, and in that one, he started with a professional and a amateur division, kids, and they just did ballroom dancing. When the Imperial Society was formed, they started their first competition actually at the Corso Club in New York City. They did just one evening during the night, and it was only a couple of events. Then they went from there to Atlantic City and started the Imperial competitions.
I see.
And they ran primarily international ballroom. In 1976, they started to do international Latin. So at first it was just the ballroom competition starting on the Saturday, and then it was international ballroom and Latin. They held the professional events on Sunday. Saturday night was just a dinner dance. And that's how the event started.
I see. I remember, I just want to jump back for a little bit there. 2 questions for you. I know that you had said that it was the New York Daily News that was the big advertiser and the sponsor of the Harvest Moon Ball events. And I know that you mentioned to me in an earlier conversation that because of their marketing that they used to fill Madison Square Garden. So people came from all over to watch these ballroom dance competitions, but it was on stage then too, wasn't it?
Yes,
So
it was.
not like we know it today.
No, it was actually held almost like a boxing match. They had a raised platform in the center of the audience, and they danced on that. The Harvest Moon Ball, well, it went from there at the old garden to the new Madison Square Garden, but it was held in the Felt Forum of the new garden.
Yes.
And that lasted probably, 40 years.
Amazing. That's amazing. The other question I wanted to ask you is, you were talking about the Imperial Society, which we know was a society that was formed in England, and then you were instrumental in having the ISTD come into the United States. And it's also my understanding that you were the negotiator of forming the American branch of the Imperial Society, which we know as the U.S. ISTD.
All right. It started out as the United States Ballroom branch of the Imperial Society of Teachers of Dancing. And we were admitted to the National Dance Council. The National Dance Council at that time was called the National Council of Dance Teacher Associations, NCDTO.
Wow.
And they had a ballroom division which was called the USBC, United States Ballroom Council. Mm-hmm. The Imperial Society became a member of that, but because they were a branch of a foreign organization, it was determined that they would have to leave the council. Mm-hmm. So in 1976, I went to London and negotiated with the London branch, mm-hmm. the mother company of mm-hmm. Imperial Society, to form an independent branch. And what we finally came up with a couple of days of negotiation, myself, Alex Moore, and Peter Pearson, we came up with the idea of a license agreement, that the United States would have a license agreement to use the name Imperial Society. And we became the United States Imperial Society of Teachers of Dancing, wow. USISTD. And that was done just simply so we could stay on the NCDTO.
I see.
Then in 1976, because we became an independent organization and we didn't have to just follow the U.S. Agreement with London that we were only a branch, we were allowed to do the Latin.
I see.
But before 1976, Imperial Society was not allowed to give Latin exams, and they could not have Latin competitions.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that all started in 1976.
So fast forward now, the NCDTO is now called the NDCA, which is the modern version of what we know as the governing body of our industry. Now, Dennis, you serve currently and for many years as the treasurer of the NDCA, but you have held lots of different executive positions, haven't you?
I was a second vice president. I've been treasurer for a long time, and at one point I was actually president of the NDCA. The NDCA changed from NCDTO to NDCA 1984, and then it became NDCA. So
now you preside as chairman of judges, along with your wife Jackie Rogers, at the majority of events all throughout the United States. If you look at the dancing business as you know it from when you started in 1955 to where we are today in 2021, what would you say? I mean, I know that there's been many changes, but what would you say were the most standout changes to you that you've seen over these years?
Well, the expansion of categories, expansion of age groups, the level of dancing has been enormously changed, and we are probably the leading country in the world in not only the standard of dance, but in the success of the business. Mm-hmm.
Well, there are currently, 96 registered multi-day competitions that are on the NDCA roster. We're not even counting the one-day events.
Right. With the one-day events, it's more like 140 to 150.
Amazing.
So
that's really something. Let's talk about dancing for a second. What do you see as the biggest changes in dancing? I mean, you were really there at the inception of competition dancing and teaching because you were an instructor independently and with Arthur Murray's for a very long time. So what would you say a lot of the changes are that you see, and do you think that they're for the better?
Well, change is change, and I don't always agree that it's for the better or not, but it certainly has been successful. Initially, it was you were either an amateur or you were a professional. Then the Imperial Society started the Pro-Am type of competition, primarily because the two chain studios, Arthur Murray and Fred Astaire, were running competitions for their teachers, and teachers that left the chain and were teaching independently had nowhere to go. So that's why the independent competition started, just to have a place for these students to dance
To be
with
able
their
to
teachers.
compete, right?
The first Arthur Murray Pro-Am competition was held at Lincoln Center on the stage,
Oh, wow.
Carnegie Hall.
Uh-huh.
And Arthur and Catherine Murray were judges for it.
Oh, really?
That was 1959 at that point. So then they went to Atlantic City and they started an event called the Dance Olympics. They were told they couldn't use the word Olympics. Then it became Dancerama, and that's how that came. And it started
Is this interesting or what? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Where even the names of things come from. Fascinating.
It started in Atlantic City, one event in New York first, and then Imperial went to Atlantic City. And I'm trying to regain my train of thought here.
So what do you see as the biggest things that were introduced along the way that have really stayed and become, just like such a standard part of what we do now?
Well, first, the Pro-Am competitions were one category. Pro-Am, that was it. Then we started the medal standard. So you had a bronze, silver, and gold. And initially, you danced in the bronze category until the student earned a bronze medal. Then they moved up to silver. When they got their silver medal, they had to move to gold.
I see.
So it was a compulsory thing. The students actually had to progress
I see.
through the dancing. And I think because of that, it really lifted the standard, because everybody learned the basics before they went on to doing the kitchen sink.
Right. You couldn't move beyond
No.
the basics until you placed. That's really very interesting. That is great. Something that would be really nice to have today, I think. Don't you think?
Well, they finally, in 2019, the National Dance Council has passed a rule where in the medal division, like bronze, silver, or gold, and the age category, if a student wins it in a multi-dance event that has a semifinal, then they have to move up either in category or down in age.
I see.
So that is now a rule. So
That's
it's,
great.
It's
so there
quite
is a
good.
rule of advancement.
Right. There
That's
is a
really
rule.
wonderful.
Finally.
That's great. What would you say is is there like one or two standout things that are for the better that are incorporated into, dance as we know it today?
Well, dancing has progressed, and I don't know if it's for the better or not, but dancing to me is a couple dancing together, responding to each other, lead and follow, and I'm not very thrilled about seeing a lot of side-by-side and solo work because it's not a partnership responding, leading and responding, which I would have liked to see. But
Right, it's almost
it
more
seems
of a
to be
stage
working,
style,
but
yeah.
I kind of like the way it was.
Right, a couple dancing together.
A couple dancing together, right.
That's great. Is there anything that you would like to see differently, or are there things that that were really working over the time that kind of got thrown out or put aside that you would like to see reintroduced again?
Well, there's a category that I think could be used of side by side. Many years ago, you often saw a couple of guys or three guys or even four guys dancing side by side and doing mambo. And it would be like a shine mambo. There's categories where this would be great if you had a couple dancing side by side, no contact, just doing a routine together and then being judged against other couples doing the same thing.
Ah, very interesting concept.
And then have a separate group where they can't separate more than X amount of time. So that you get to see the response between leader and follower or side by side.
I understand that even heel leads and that we take for granted today and alignments in dancing were not really introduced until the early 1970s. Is that accurate?
Well, this goes back to the training. Heel leads and toe leads and so on, all became there because of the dancing. They didn't come first. Good dancing came first. If you were using rise and fall, you would use your feet to elevate and you'd use your feet to go down. And the result was you'd either be rising up to get onto height or lowering. Now, it's like stepping off a curb. You wouldn't step off a curb onto a heel. If you step off a curb, you put your toe down and the foot comes down after it. So lowering becomes a toe heel. It doesn't go from toe on one foot to heel on the other foot without lowering. So rising and falling is what determines footwork. The footwork wasn't put there to make it difficult. The footwork occurred because you danced well.
I see. So, I mean, you've seen it all. You've done most of it based on everything that we've discussed. In addition to your accomplishment with the USISTD, what would you say is how am I trying to word this? One of your biggest contribution to our industry?
Well, my biggest thing to the industry is obviously the improvement of dancing. The improvement of dancing has to be recognized, and you do that by competitions. What I would like to tell everybody is that each performance that you do is judged on that particular performance. You aren't going to be judged on what you did last week, not what you did for the past year, or not even what you did in the earlier round. If the judges would look at what they see and just put it down, regardless of where it's going to fall, it's almost like masking everyone and just doing what's happening. That would be my greatest satisfaction to see that happen throughout the industry.
Okay, that's wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our first interview. This is Dennis Rogers. Please join us in wishing Dennis a very, very happy, I believe, is it right, 83? 84th birthday. Just celebrated that last week. And Dennis, we wish you many, many more, and always stay residing as a chairman of judges because we need you.
Thanks, John.
For sure. Thank you. Thanks for watching, everyone.